haven't written down this story in 40 years, not because I was afraid to remember it, but because I wasn't sure anyone would understand. Now, sitting here at 73 years old, my hands trembling over this keyboard in a quiet apartment I never thought I'd afford, I find myself needing to finally tell someone. The internet feels safer than a confession, somehow, anonymous witnesses to a life that nearly ended before it truly began. My name is Leonardo DiCaprio. Yes, that Leonardo DiCaprio, though by the time you're reading this, that name probably carries more weight than it did the day my father threw me out of his house with $300 in my pocket and told me never to come back. I was 29 years old when my father and I had our final conversation. He was 61, robust, strong, with the kind of hands that had built things, literally. He'd been a construction contractor in Southern California, the kind of man who could look at an empty lot and see a future. For most of my life, I thought that was his greatest quality. I was wrong. His greatest quality was his ability to make you feel small. My father, Roberto DiCaprio, immigrated to the United States from Italy in 1955 with nothing but a leather satchel and a determination that burned so bright you could see it in his eyes even 30 years later. My mother was American, born and raised in Los Angeles. She had Italian heritage too on her mother's side, which is how my father's arranged marriage in progress became a love story. At least, that's what I believed for the first 28 years of my life. They met at a community dance in 1960. My mother, Ermeline, was 19 and wearing a blue dress that caught the light when she moved. My father always said he knew within 5 minutes of meeting her that she would be his wife. He was 30, already building his reputation in construction, already accumulating the kind of wealth that impressed people in post-war Los Angeles. I was born in 1953. Wait, that math doesn't work. My parents met in 1960. Let me recalculate. I was born in 1953, which means my mother was pregnant when she married my father, which means my father married her knowing she was carrying another man's child. But that's not how he told it. In his version, I was born in 1954, and everything fit into the narrative he preferred. The immigrant who built an empire, married a beautiful American girl, and fathered a son who would continue his legacy. The truth was messier. The truth usually is. My childhood wasn't unhappy. I wouldn't want you to think that. My father provided for us generously. We lived in a beautiful home in the Hollywood Hills. I attended private school. My mother was warm, present, loving, but my father, he was like an earthquake that could happen at any moment. You never knew when he would shake or how violently. He had certain expectations, unspoken but clear as day. I would grow up to be a man who built things, who commanded respect, who never backed down from a challenge. I would not be soft. I would not be artistic. I would not, under any circumstances, be weak. When I was 11, I told him I wanted to take acting classes. I can still see his face. We were in his study, a room I rarely entered unless summoned. The walls were lined with photographs, him shaking hands with city councilmen, him standing in front of half-built office complexes, him with his construction crew looking like the king of his own empire. There were no photographs of me. Acting classes, he repeated, as if I'd said something obscene. Yes, sir, there's a program at school. The teacher says I have a talent for. You have a talent for wasting my money, he interrupted. Acting is for people who have no skills, people who cannot build or create anything real. You will do no such thing. I was 11, I should have listened to him, but something in me, some stubborn gene inherited from him, ironically, refused to accept his verdict. That summer I lied to him. I told him I was at my friend's house learning about construction and business. Instead, I was in a small studio in West Hollywood, learning about blocking and emotional truth and the craft of becoming someone else. He found out, as fathers always do. Someone saw me, or perhaps I got too comfortable with the lie, started leaving evidence. When he confronted me, I expected anger. What I got instead was something worse, disappointment. You have made yourself into a liar, he said quietly, and those words hurt more than any beating could have. You have betrayed my trust. You have chosen a path of weakness. I didn't act again until I was 16, and when I did, I didn't ask permission. I simply did it, and I didn't tell him until I'd already booked my first real role. A small part in a television commercial. A teenager eating a cereal and smiling. But I was smiling on television, and my father found out, and the disappointment in his eyes was a chasm I could never quite bridge. Here's the thing about fathers and sons, the ones who don't quite fit together, I mean. You spend your whole life trying to become someone they might approve of, even as you're becoming someone they could never understand. And the harder you try, the further you fall short, until eventually you stop trying, and that's somehow even worse. By my late 20s, my life had taken a trajectory my father couldn't have imagined. I'd become an actor, not just any actor, the kind of actor people recognized on the street, who was being offered roles in major films, who was starting to build something people would see and remember. Every achievement felt like a betrayal in my own home. My father had stopped coming to my film premieres around the time I turned 25. When I asked my mother why, she gave me a sad, tired smile and said, "He's proud of you, he just doesn't know how to show it." But I didn't believe that. I believed he was ashamed of me. Part 2, The Woman's. Her name was Melody. In my defense, I was 28, living in a house in Malibu that felt too big and too empty, and drinking too much at parties where everyone was beautiful and nobody was real. Melody was different. She was warm, and she seemed genuinely interested in me, not in Leonardo DiCaprio the actor, but in Leo, the man underneath. She came from nothing, which is perhaps important to the story. Her parents had immigrated from Vietnam, and she'd grown up in Orange County, the daughter of a seamstress and a janitor. She worked as a photographer's assistant and had dreams of opening her own studio. She laughed easily, cried during movies, and once drove 2 hours at midnight to help my mother with a broken water heater because she couldn't stand to hear Ermeline apologizing for the inconvenience. My father hated her immediately. It wasn't racism, exactly, though I don't think he would have been thrilled with any woman I chose. The issue was that she wasn't Italian. More than that, she had the temerity to not care about my money or my status. She wore thrift store clothes and drove a 12-year-old Honda Civic. She wanted to talk about books and music and ideas, not the square footage of properties or the net worth of my Hollywood friends. "She's distracting you," my father said, one of the last civil conversations we had about her. We were in his office at his construction company. It was 1982, early spring, and I'd just told him we were getting married. "She makes me happy," I said. "Happiness is irrelevant," he replied, with the certainty of a man who had never questioned his own logic. "What matters is building something, creating a legacy. She will pull you away from that." "Maybe I don't want your kind of legacy," I said, and I watched his face change. Something closed in him. A door that had been slightly ajar slammed shut. "Then you are not my son," he said, and I thought he was being metaphorical, dramatic, the kind of thing fathers say when they're angry, not something they actually mean. Melody and I got married on June 12, 1982, in a small ceremony at City Hall. My mother came, my sister Gioia came, several of my friends came, my father did not. He sent a card, which my mother had written, I'm certain, expressing regrets about a business commitment. When I opened it, I felt something break inside me, some small, stubborn hope that he might eventually come around. He did not come around. Marriage lasted 3 years. That sounds like a failure now, but at the time it felt like the longest love story that had ever existed. We were happy, genuinely happy, in the way that young people in love are happy before real life intervenes. We traveled. We made love in cheap motel rooms while listening to rain. We talked about opening her photography studio and me taking smaller roles in independent films. We imagined a different kind of life than the one we'd been born into. But there were also cracks. Small ones at first. I started working longer hours. She wanted to start trying for a baby, and I wasn't ready. We had a fight about something I can't remember, and then another fight about the same thing, and then we were fighting about everything. The intimacy that had made the relationship feel like a refuge started to feel suffocating. More importantly, I was starting to care more about my career than I cared about our marriage, and she knew it. When she asked for a divorce, I was relieved. That's the hard truth I've never told anyone. I was relieved that someone else was making the decision for us both, releasing us from an obligation that had started to feel like a cage. But before she left, she said something that haunted me for 40 years. "Your father was wrong about me. I wasn't distracting you from your legacy. I was showing you there could be a different kind of legacy, one that mattered more." Part 3. The Estrangement. After the divorce, I thought perhaps my father might forgive me. If the problem was Melody, and Melody was gone, then the problem was solved, right? That was my logic, the logic of a man still trying to please a father who had stopped listening. I called my mother on a Thursday evening and asked if I could come to the house for dinner. She was quiet for a moment, and I could hear her breathing, and I knew without her saying a word that my father had forbidden it. Or perhaps he hadn't forbidden it, but his presence would make it impossible. "I don't think that's a good idea right now," my mother said gently. "Give him some time, he's hurt." "He's been hurt for my entire life," I said, surprised by the bitterness in my own voice. "I know, sweetheart," she said, "I know." But time didn't heal anything. Instead, it calcified the wound. Years passed. I saw my mother occasionally. We'd meet for lunch, always away from the house, always with the undertone of secrecy. She would tell me about my father's business, his health, his life, and I would listen like a son listening to stories about a stranger. I built a career, a real one, not the kind my father had envisioned, not buildings that would stand for decades, visible to anyone driving down the highway, but the kind that lasted anyway, roles in films that people watched, that moved them, that made them feel less alone, films about young men searching for meaning, for connection, for a place to belong, films that, looking back, were probably just me trying to understand my father through the lens of every character I played. In 1986, my father had a heart attack. My mother called me at 2 in the morning, her voice small and terrified. I drove to the hospital in the rain, and for the first time in 4 years, I saw my father's face without the wall of anger he wore like a mask. He was unconscious, 68 years old, and he looked ancient, vulnerable, like the immigrant boy he'd been when he arrived in America with nothing. I sat by his bed for 3 hours, my hand close to his, not touching, not quite brave enough to make that gesture. When he woke up, the first thing he did was turn his head away from me. I left the hospital and didn't come back. My mother said he was recovering well, that the doctors were optimistic, that he'd been lucky. I told myself that his recovery meant I didn't have to face him yet, that I could wait for the right moment, when he was well enough to really talk, when we could finally have the conversation we'd been avoiding for 4 years. That moment never came. Or rather, it came 40 years later, and by then everything had changed. Part 4. The Years Between. I want to tell you about my life between 1982 and 2022, but also I don't. These are the years of success. The years where I built the career my father said I couldn't, where I became someone people recognized and respected, where I accumulated money and accolades, and all the markers of success that a man like my father should have understood. But none of it mattered. That's the thing about living in estrangement from your parent. Every achievement is hollow. Every award feels like a rebuke. You want to show them what you've built, and instead you build walls higher and higher until you forget what it felt like to not be behind them. I never married again. That might have been intentional, or it might have just been what happened. I dated women, some for a long time, but never long enough to introduce them to my mother, never long enough to imagine them sitting at my father's dinner table. It was as if some part of me had decided that my father's verdict on my marriage to Melody was a verdict on all my relationships. They would all be distractions from my legacy, failures waiting to happen. My mother would tell me carefully that my father asked about me, that he'd seen one of my films and sat quietly for a long time afterward, that he'd bragged to one of his construction partners that his son was an actor, saying it with a kind of awkward pride, as if he was learning the language of parental admiration for the first time. But he never called, he never wrote, he never, in 40 years, made a gesture toward reconciliation. I told myself I didn't want him to. I told myself I'd moved on, that his approval was irrelevant, that I'd built a different kind of legacy that he could never have understood. And sometimes I believed it. Usually I was lying to myself. Part 5. The Funeral. I got the call on a Wednesday in April 2022. My mother had died 5 years earlier. She'd gone quietly, with my hand in hers and my sister Gioia by her side. My father had lived on another 5 years after that, alone in the house in Hollywood Hills, tended by nurses and his own stubborn will. He was 94 when he died, 94 years old, and I was 70. My sister called me. "Dad's gone," she said simply. There was a long pause. "Leo, I need you to come home." Home, as if the house in Hollywood Hills had ever stopped being that, even though I hadn't set foot inside it in more than 40 years. I almost didn't go, that's the honest truth. When Gioia asked me to come home, my first instinct was to find an excuse. I was in the middle of filming, I had commitments, I couldn't leave. But my sister, who had always been kinder than me, who had maintained a relationship with my father even as I refused to, said 4 words that changed everything. "Mom would want you." So I went. The house was exactly as I remembered it, which meant it was completely unrecognizable. Everything was smaller, the ceilings lower, the rooms more cramped, the grandeur of my childhood memories compressed into something ordinary, almost shabby. The study where my father had told me I was wasting his money on acting classes was just a room with old furniture and faded paint. The funeral was well attended. My father had lived a long life, had built things that people knew, had left an imprint on the Los Angeles landscape. There were city councilmen there, business partners, construction workers he'd hired decades ago who'd come to pay respects. There was no one there from my life, and I realized how completely I'd allowed my father to separate me from myself. I gave a eulogy. I don't remember what I said. I know I mentioned his work ethic, his pride, his love for the country that had given him opportunity. I know I did not mention the estrangement. I know I talked about him as if he was a man I'd known, and I wondered if anyone in that room could see through the lie. After the service, as people were leaving, a man approached me. He was older, maybe mid-80s, with kind eyes and skin that looked like well-worn leather. He was wearing a suit that had been expensive once, now faded and carefully maintained. "Mr. DiCaprio," he said quietly. "Leonardo, I mean, may I speak with you for a moment?" I nodded, and he led me away from the crowd, into my father's study, the room where so many of my childhood wounds had been inflicted. "My name is Frank Santoro," he said. "I worked with your father for more than 50 years. I was his first foreman, and then his partner, and then, toward the end of his life, his friend." "It's nice to meet you," I said, uncertain why this man was introducing himself so formally. "Before your father died," Frank said slowly, "he asked me to give you something. He made me promise. He said if anything happened to him, you were to have this, and no one else was to know about it." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. It was old, yellowed, sealed with tape that had turned brittle. My name was written on the front in handwriting I recognized immediately, my father's large, angry scrawl. "What is this?" I asked, though I already knew. I could feel it, the weight of 40 years pressing against the envelope. "I don't know," Frank said honestly. He wouldn't tell me. "He just made me swear on my mother's grave that I would give it to you, and that I would tell you something else." "What?" Frank looked toward the doorway, as if checking to see if anyone was listening. Then he turned back to me, and his eyes were wet with tears. "He said to tell you that he was sorry, that he should have been prouder, that he should have watched your films, that he watched them anyway, even though he'd told himself he wouldn't, and that you were the best thing he ever made, and he wasted 40 years being too proud to tell you." I don't remember much after that. I remember Frank pressing the envelope into my hands. I remember people offering condolences. I remember driving back to my hotel in a daze, not opening the envelope, just sitting on the bed and holding it like it was a live thing that might escape if I didn't keep my grip tight. I opened it at 3 in the morning. Inside was a letter, handwritten on heavy paper with my father's careful script, and inside the letter were photographs. Part 6, the letter. Leonardo *. If you're reading this, I am dead, and I hope that Frank Santoro kept his promise to give this to you. I have not trusted many people in my life, but I trust Frank. I trust him to do what I could not. I am writing this because I owe you an apology, and I am not a man who knows how to apologize. I am a man who builds things, who understands stone and concrete and steel, who can look at a pile of rubble and see a structure. But I have never been good at understanding people. I have never been good at understanding my own son. When you were born, I made a decision. I decided that I would teach you to be a man like me, strong, successful, unwilling to accept failure. I decided that sensitivity was weakness and that ambition was the only currency that mattered. I decided these things before I knew you, and I never revised my decision, even when you became someone who required different kinds of understanding. The first time you told me you wanted to act, I felt something in my chest that I now understand was fear. Not fear of you becoming an actor, fear that you would succeed and that your success would mean leaving the world I understood, leaving me behind. I mistook that fear for disappointment. I mistook my own cowardice for parental guidance. I told you that you were wasting my money, that acting was for people with no skills. I said these things to hurt you, though I did not admit it to myself. I thought that if I hurt you enough, you would give up on this dream and become the man I wanted you to be. Instead, I just hurt you. When you married Melody, I was angry, but I was not angry at her. I was angry at you for choosing something other than what I had chosen. I was angry at myself for raising a son who could imagine a different kind of life, and therefore for failing at the only task I had ever taken seriously. I threw you out of my house. I refused to see you for 40 years. I watched your films alone, late at night, when no one could see me cry. I watched you become the thing I said you could never be, a great man, respected, someone who moved people and changed them through his work. Every film you made was a rebuke to me. Every achievement was proof that I was wrong. And instead of being proud, and I was proud, God knows I was proud, I was ashamed. Ashamed that I had been wrong about you. Ashamed that I had wasted 40 years of your life and mine. I tried many times to bridge the gap between us. Your mother would come home from her lunches with you and tell me you had asked about me. She would tell me you had said you wanted to come home, and every time I would say no. I would tell myself that too much time had passed, that you wouldn't want to see me anyway, that the anger between us was too deep to heal. The truth was that I was afraid that if I reached out, you would reject me the way I had rejected you, afraid that you would tell me I had forfeited my right to be your father, afraid that you would ask me questions I could not answer about why I was so cruel, why I was so unable to see the good thing right in front of me. When I had my heart attack in 1986, I thought I would die. I was on that hospital bed, and I thought about all the things I had not said to you, all the apologies I had not made, and I wanted to reach for you, but I didn't know how. By the time I recovered, I had convinced myself that it was better to leave things as they were. A sad lie, but a lie I could live with. I am old now, Leonardo. I am 88 years old, and I do not have much time left. I am still afraid, but I am also tired of being angry, tired of pretending that I was right, tired of missing my son. I have arranged my will such that the bulk of my estate, which is substantial, goes to charities, to hospitals, to shelters, to organizations that help immigrants and their families. I did this not because I wanted to hurt you or your sister, but because I wanted to leave something good behind, something that might balance the scales for all the pain I have caused. But I have also made a second will. This one is hidden, and only you know about it. In this will, I leave you the house in Hollywood Hills where you grew up, where I was cruel to you, where your mother raised you with more grace than I had any right to expect. I leave it to you because I want you to reclaim it. I want you to go back inside those rooms and remember the boy you were before I taught you to believe that my disappointment was the only measure of your worth. I want you to understand that the house was never ugly. I was. The house was just a place where a man failed to love his son the way that son deserved. I also want you to know that I watched every film you made. I keep them on video, all of them, in the library. And I watched them over and over, sometimes 3 times in a row. I watched you grow as an artist. I watched you learn how to show the world the interior of a human heart in a way I never could. I watched you become extraordinary. You asked me once, I think in some conversation I only imagined, what legacy I wanted you to build. I told you it was about buildings and money and power. But I was wrong. Your legacy is measured in something far more valuable, the way you have moved people, changed their understanding of what it means to be human, shown them themselves through your art. That is the greatest legacy, and I am sorry it took me 60 years to understand it. I am sorry for all of it, Leonardo. I am sorry for the anger. I am sorry for the silence. I am sorry for being too proud to reach for you when you needed your father. I am sorry. If there is an afterlife, I hope your mother will forgive me, and I hope somehow you will too. Dad. Part 7, The Revelation. I don't remember how long I sat there holding that letter. Time became strange, liquid, unreliable. The sun came up and went down. My phone rang and I didn't answer. Room service left food that I didn't eat. I existed in a kind of suspended state, reading those words over and over, searching for something I wasn't sure what. Apologies from the dead are strange things. They have no weight, no real consequence. He couldn't take back what he'd done. He couldn't give me back those 40 years. And yet, reading his words, I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness, exactly, that seemed too simple a word for what I was experiencing. More-like understanding. More-like recognition that the man who had hurt me was also a man who had been hurt, caught in the same patterns of fear and pride that had shaped my own life. The letter contained photographs, old ones, mostly black and white pictures of him and my mother when they were young, but there were also newer ones printed from video stills, still frames from my movies, printed out and annotated in my father's handwriting, notes beside my face, good work here, this scene reminds me of you, you look like your grandfather. In one of them, a frame from a film I'd made in 1998, I was crying on screen. My character was begging his father for forgiveness, and next to it, my father had written in his careful hand, I understand this now, I should have understood it then. Frank Santoro came to see me at the hotel. I didn't ask him to, I'd given no one my location, but somehow he found me anyway. You read the letter, he said, it wasn't a question. Yes. He changed his mind, you know, Frank said, settling into a chair without asking permission. At 86, he'd earned the right. About a year ago, he called me and said he couldn't keep doing it, couldn't keep pretending he didn't care about you, couldn't keep letting the years pile up. He wanted to call you. He asked me if I thought you'd take his call. What did you tell him? I told him that I didn't know. That some people surprise you and some people don't. That the only way to find out was to try. Did he try? He started to, 100 times. He'd sit with the phone in his hands for hours, but then he'd put it down. He was afraid you'd reject him. I probably would have, I said quietly. Maybe or maybe you would have surprised him. Maybe you both would have surprised each other. Frank leaned back in the chair. He loved you, you know. He was just terrible at showing it. He showed it by watching my films. He showed it by much more than that, Frank said. He hired private investigators to follow your career. He kept every review of every film you ever made. He told everyone at his office about you, bragging about his actor son, calling you the great Leonardo DiCaprio. He built a library because you said in an interview once that books were important to you. I stared at him. He built a library. The one in the house. He added that room 7 years ago. He made it beautiful so that when you came home, and he believed, in some strange way, that you would come home, you would find something you loved. Part 8, The Inheritance. I went back to the house for the reading of the will. My sister Gioia was there, along with my brother. I have a brother, Francesco, though we've never been close. There was a lawyer, a tired-looking man in his 60s named William Chen, who handled the formalities with the practiced ease of someone who'd seen this all before. The main will was read first. My father's estate was worth approximately $43 million, far more than I'd realized. The bulk of it, as his letter had promised, was being distributed to various charities and community organizations. My sister received $2 million outright, plus the trust fund that had been established for her decades ago. Francesco received the same. There were also funds set aside for staff, the nurses who'd cared for him in his final years, the housekeeper who'd worked for him for 30 years. And then William Chen cleared his throat and said, "There is also a secondary will. It was sealed and delivered to me with specific instructions. Mr. Leonardo DiCaprio, this is addressed to you." He handed me another envelope, older than the first, sealed with wax that had begun to crack with age. The room fell silent. My brother Francesco leaned forward. "What is this?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "It's sealed." "Well, open it," my sister urged, but there was something in her tone that suggested she already knew what it contained. I broke the seal and read the will. It was brief, formal, written in legal language, but unmistakably in my father's voice beneath the formality. I left the house to Leonardo DiCaprio. Everything in it, including the library with the complete collection of my films on video, labeled with dates, and my father's handwritten notes. He also left me a safe deposit box at the Bank of America, to which he included the key. When I opened the safe deposit box later that week, I found more than I could have imagined. Inside were documents, my father's journals, written over the last 10 years of his life, thousands of pages of reflection, anger, regret, pride, love. He wrote about his immigrant father who had beaten him for crying. He wrote about the pressure he'd felt to be a certain kind of man, strong, successful, dominant. He wrote about the specific moment he decided that he would raise me to be like that, and the thousands of moments afterward where he saw evidence that I was becoming someone different, and how terrified that had made him. He wrote about the night I married Melody. He wrote that he'd driven by City Hall after the ceremony, hoping to catch a glimpse of me, and how he'd sat in his car watching people come out of the building in their wedding clothes, and how he'd realized that I wasn't there anymore. I'd moved beyond his reach, and it was his fault. He wrote about each of my films, about watching Titanic in a theater alone, how he'd wept because he finally understood what his son was capable of, and how he'd hated himself for ever suggesting that I couldn't be great. He wrote about my mother, how he'd loved her and treated her poorly in equal measure, how she'd been the conscience he never had, how she'd tried year after year to bridge the gap between us, and how he'd punished her for it by refusing to see you. And near the end, he wrote about regret, about how he understood in his final years that I had never needed him to be proud of me. I had become proud of myself. What I had needed was for him to be present. What I had needed was the simple gift of his attention. There was also a letter he'd written but never sent. It was addressed to Melody. I almost didn't read it, but I did. Part 9, the UNSCNT letter. Melody **. If you ever read this, know that you were right about everything. You were not a distraction. You were not the reason my son failed to build my kind of legacy. You were trying to show him that there could be a different kind of success, a different kind of happiness. You were also not responsible for the failure of your marriage. My son is like me, driven, ambitious, restless. He would have outgrown that marriage with or without your presence because he is meant for bigger things, but not in the way I meant it. Not in buildings and money and status. I saw you once, years after you and Leonardo separated. You were walking down the street in Santa Monica, and you were with a man and a child. A girl, maybe 7 years old, with her father's coloring and her mother's smile. And I realized that you had gone on. You had built a life. You had not been destroyed by the rejection, by the failure of your marriage to my son. That gave me hope, I think. It suggested that love was not a zero-sum game, that failure did not have to be permanent, that people could move forward. I should have told Leonardo about this. I should have said, that woman you married taught you something important, even though you didn't know it at the time. She taught you that there are different ways to live, different definitions of success. She taught you that not everything is about achievement. But I was too proud. I was too committed to the narrative that she had been wrong for you, when the truth was that I was wrong for both of you. If your daughter is reading this somehow, if she knows her mother was married to the great Leonardo DiCaprio and is curious, I want her to know your mother was kind. She was kind to my wife. She was kind to the world. My son may not have appreciated her fully in the time they had together, but I saw her kindness and I respect it. You probably don't remember me, but I remember you. I remember your smile when you talked about your photography studio. I remember how you looked at my son like he was the most interesting person in the world. I remember the dinner you made for us once. I think it was Vietnamese. Your mother's cooking, you said. And how you sang while you were cooking, unself-consciously, like joy was something you could simply express without censoring. I never felt that way. I never felt free enough to sing while cooking, and I think that was a loss. I'm sorry that I treated you with coldness. I'm sorry that I spoke about you with disdain to your face and then worse behind your back. I'm sorry that I was an obstacle to something that might have brought my son happiness. I hope you're well. I hope your daughter is happy. I hope you remember that you were loved, even if that love was not expressed in the ways you deserved. Roberto DiCaprio *. Part 10. The Truth Revealed. After I'd read everything, the letters, the journals, the will, I sat in the library of the house for hours. The room my father had built for me. The walls were lined with books, organized by subject, all carefully selected. Architecture, art history, philosophy, literature, sciences. And there, in a special locked cabinet, was every film I'd ever made. I opened the cabinet and looked at them. VHS tapes at first, then DVDs, then laser discs. He'd kept multiple formats because he was afraid of missing something if the technology became obsolete. And on the inside of each case, his handwriting, annotations, dates, times he'd watched them, reactions. Next to Titanic, this is extraordinary. How did he know to do that? How did he know to break the man's heart that way? Next to The Wolf of Wall Street, I recognize myself in this character. I recognize what I taught you. I'm sorry. Next to The Revenant, this is survival. This is what I understand, but it's not about revenge like I thought. It's about grace. How did you learn grace when I never showed it to you? I called my sister. Come to the house, I said. When she arrived, I was sitting in the library, surrounded by my own films. She stopped in the doorway. He built this for you, I said. Frank told me 7 years ago he built this room because he wanted you to have somewhere to come home to. Gioia's eyes filled with tears. He loved you so much, she said. I think he loved you more than he loved himself. Then why did he wait so long? The question came out bitter, angry. Why did he let 40 years pass before he decided to tell me? Because he was a man, Gioia said quietly. A proud, frightened, stubborn man who was trapped by his own need to be right. He couldn't apologize first. He couldn't risk that kind of vulnerability. So he did the only thing he knew how to do. He tried to control the outcome by dying first. I understood what she meant. Even his apology, his second will, his library, it was all an attempt to have the final word, to apologize on his own terms, to control the narrative even in death. And I found, sitting there in that room full of my own image, that I forgave him for that. Not for the estrangement, not for the 40 years lost, but for being human, for being broken in the way we're all broken. Part 11. The Brothers. My brother Francesco had been quiet throughout the funeral and the will reading. He'd nodded respectfully, accepted his inheritance, and said very little. He'd always been the practical one, 2 years older than me, a businessman who'd inherited our father's construction company and expanded it further. The day after I discovered the library, Francesco called. We should talk, he said. We met at a coffee shop downtown, far away from the house. Francesco looked tired, older than he should have. He'd inherited the company, after all, and the weight of that had never entirely left his shoulders. I read Dad's journals, he said without preamble. He left me a copy sealed, but he said I should read them. He wanted me to understand why he treated you the way he did. And I prompted. And I realized that I've been angry at you for my entire life, Francesco said quietly. I've been angry that you got to rebel against him, that you got to choose your own path, that you left, and even though it caused pain, at least you left. I didn't choose to leave, I was thrown out. I know, but I couldn't forgive you for being brave enough to refuse his vision for your life. I was too cowardly to do that, so I inherited the company instead. I became what he wanted me to become, and I hated you for not doing the same. I didn't know what to say to that. He wrote something about me, Francesco continued. In the journals, he wrote that he regretted not pushing back harder on me, not encouraging me to find my own way. He said he thought he'd learned from what happened with you, so he decided to let me choose. But instead of being grateful, I just assumed it meant he didn't care as much about my path as he did about yours. I'm sorry, I said, and I meant it. Don't be, it's not your fault. It's not even really his fault, although he certainly contributed to it. It's just how families work sometimes. Generational trauma and pain passed down like DNA. Do you want to break the cycle? I asked. Francesco smiled sadly. I'm too old to break cycles. I'm 57 years old, Leonardo. I've spent my whole life in my father's construction company. I have my own children who barely know me because I'm always working. I've made my choices. You could choose differently now. Maybe, but the man I've become, I'm not sure there's enough of the original Francesco left to become anything else. It was one of the saddest things I'd ever heard, and I realized that my father's estrangement from me had had ripple effects I'd never imagined. It had poisoned my relationship with Francesco. It had made my brother feel unloved, unchallenged, less worthy of a father's concern. My father had tried to compensate for his mistakes with me by neglecting to push Francesco to become his own man, and in doing so, he'd failed Francesco in a different way. The house is mine, I said suddenly, but the company is yours, the life you've built is yours, and the choices you make from this moment forward, those are yours too. It's not too late, Francesco, it's never too late. My brother's eyes were wet. How are you so good? He asked. How are you not destroyed by all of this? I am destroyed, I said. I've been destroyed for 40 years, but I've built something from the ruins, and so can you. Part 12, The Reclamation. I moved into the house in Hollywood Hills in May 2022. I know how that sounds. Leonardo DiCaprio, the famous actor, living in his childhood home, reopening old wounds, trying to heal from his father's rejection. It sounds like a narrative, a story someone would write for him. But it was my choice, made by me, for reasons that had nothing to do with seeking closure or redemption or any of those clean narrative arcs that Americans love. I moved into the house because it was mine, because my father had built it for me in the end, and I wanted to honor that gesture even if I couldn't honor the man who'd made it. The first night I slept in my childhood bedroom, I hadn't been in that room since I was 29 years old. The furniture was still there, a bed that had fit me once, a desk where I'd done homework, a closet where I'd hidden from my father's voice. But the room had changed. It was smaller than I remembered. The ceiling was lower. The walls, once imposing, were just walls. I lay in that bed and I cried. Not because I was sad, exactly, but because I was finally allowing myself to feel the sadness that I'd been running from for 40 years. I cried for the boy I had been, desperate to please a father who couldn't be pleased. I cried for the young man who'd married Melody and thought he'd finally found happiness, only to realize that he was still running, still trying to build something that would make him worthy. I cried for the actor I'd become, successful, celebrated, hollow in ways I couldn't admit, who had built a career on expressing emotions he wasn't allowed to feel in real life. And I cried for my father, for the man who'd been just as trapped as I was, caught in his own patterns, his own fear, his own desperate need to be right. The next morning, I called my therapist. I'd been in therapy for years. You can't survive this industry without it, but I'd never really talked about my father. I'd always framed it as ancient history, a conflict resolved simply by my choosing to succeed despite his expectations. But sitting in that house, I realized that nothing had been resolved. I'd just built a monument to my pain and called it a career. We started over. I talked about my father for the first time with anything approaching honesty. I talked about the estrangement, the silence, the 40 years of wondering whether he thought about me, whether he regretted what he'd done, whether he ever saw my films. And when my therapist asked me the question I'd been avoiding. I finally had an answer. "Do you forgive him?" "Yes," I said, and I meant it. "I think I do. I'm angry at him, and I'm sad about what he did, but I don't think I can carry the unforgiveness anymore. It's too heavy." Part 13, The Rebirths. 6 months after my father's funeral, I called Melody. I don't know what made me do it. I found her through a private investigator. She was living in Santa Monica, still running her photography studio, the same one she'd dreamed about 40 years ago. She was married to a different man now, a kind-looking person who wasn't me. She had 2 children who were grown, and she was a grandmother. I almost didn't make the call. I almost let the opportunity pass. One more thing I was too afraid to do. But I thought about my father, sitting with a phone in his hands, afraid to reach out, and I thought about all the years we lost because of that fear, and I dialed. "Melody." There was a pause. "Yes." "This is Leonardo DiCaprio. I don't know if you'll remember me, but we were married a very long time ago." Another pause. Then, "Of course I remember. I'd be hard-pressed to forget being married to Leonardo DiCaprio." There was something in her tone that suggested she'd made peace with our shared past long ago. It humbled me. "I wanted to apologize," I said, "for how I treated you, for not being present in our relationship, for taking you for granted, for letting my father's disapproval poison what we had." "Leonardo, that was 40 years ago." "I know, but I didn't want another 40 years to go by without saying it." She was quiet for a moment. "Would you like to come by? My husband makes excellent coffee." I went to her photography studio on a Saturday afternoon in November. The studio was beautiful, light-filled, with walls covered with her work. She was 68 years old and looked almost unchanged. Though maybe that's just how memory works with people you've loved. Maybe everyone looks unchanged when you haven't seen them for 4 decades. Her husband's name was David. He was an engineer, intelligent, kind, the kind of person who made you understand why Melody had chosen him. They had 2 children together, both grown, and her daughter from a previous relationship, the one I'd imagined when reading my father's letter, was a teacher. Her name was Sophie, and she had her mother's smile. We sat in Melody's studio and drank coffee and talked. Not about our marriage, not directly. We talked about our lives, what we'd built, what we'd learned, what we were proud of. She told me about her photography career, about how it had taken off after we'd divorced, about how she'd done a series of portraits, homeless people, immigrants, people society had rendered invisible, and how those photographs had been exhibited in galleries across the country. "I used to be angry at you," she said, not unkindly. "I thought you didn't see me. I thought our marriage failed because you were too ambitious, too focused on your career. But I realized later that wasn't the problem. The problem was that I was trying to fix something that was broken before we met." "What do you mean?" "You needed to learn how to love yourself before you could love anyone else, and you weren't ready for that. You were still trying to impress your father even though you'd left his house. You brought that need into our marriage, and I couldn't fill it." "I'm sorry," I said again, and it felt like a prayer. "You don't need to apologize to me," Melody said. "You needed to apologize to yourself. Have you done that yet?" I didn't answer immediately. I thought about the 40 years I'd spent building a career to prove something to a man who died before I could show it to him. I thought about the roles I'd played, all variations on the same theme, men trying to earn love through accomplishment, through suffering, through the sheer force of their will. "I'm working on it," I finally said. Before I left, Melody gave me a print. It was one of her photographs, a man and a boy standing on a beach at sunset. The man looked familiar. It took me a moment to realize it was my father, captured in a candid shot at a beach in Malibu. He must have been in his 50s, and he was smiling. Actually smiling, not the stern expression I'd mostly associated with him. "Do you know him?" Melody asked. "Yes," I said, my voice rough. "He was a man I knew a long time ago. I photographed him once, years after we divorced. He came into my studio, asked if I did portraits. I didn't recognize him at first, but then he mentioned who he was. He asked if I would photograph him. He wanted a portrait for his son." I looked at the photograph more closely. There was a signed certificate on the back, Roberto DiCaprio, 1988, a gift for Leonardo. 40 years, and I was still discovering new things about my father, new evidence of his love, hidden in plain sight. Part 14, The Aftermath. I lived in the house for 2 years before I decided what to do with it. I'd renovated it carefully, respectfully. I'd kept my father's study mostly intact, though I'd removed the photographs of his construction projects and replaced them with family pictures, photos of my mother, of Gioia, of Francesco. I'd expanded the library, adding my own collection of books, creating a space that belonged to both of us. But I knew I couldn't live there permanently. The house was a shrine to a relationship that had been broken, and while I'd made peace with my father, I needed to move forward. I needed to stop living in the past. So I decided to give the house to a non-profit organization dedicated to helping estranged families. It became a retreat center, a place where people could come to heal their relationships, to learn how to rebuild bridges that had been burned. The dedication ceremony took place in the spring of 2024. Frank Santoro was there, now 92 years old, sitting in my father's study and crying. My sister Gioia was there. My brother Francesco came too, though he didn't stay long. He was still working, still building things for my father's company, still not quite ready to build something for himself. And I stood in the middle of my childhood home and told a room full of people about my father. He was not a perfect man, I said. He was flawed, prideful, often cruel. He missed 40 years of his son's life because he couldn't accept that his son wanted something different from what he had prescribed. That's a tragedy. That's a failure, and my father would have understood it in those terms. But he was also a man who at the end of his life tried to make amends, not in ways I would have preferred, not in apologies delivered face to face, not in conversations where we both had the chance to speak, but in the ways he knew how. He left me a house. He left me his journals. He left me, finally, the legacy of his regret, which in the end was more valuable than any building he ever constructed. This house will now serve as a place where families can begin to heal, where people can learn that it's not too late, that estrangement doesn't have to be permanent, that love, even broken love, is still love. And I hope that my father, if he's somewhere out there, would approve of that. Part 15, The Final Understanding. I'm 73 years old now. I've continued to act, though I'm more selective about roles. I've directed some films, and I've found that I prefer being behind the camera to being in front of it. There's something about shaping a story, controlling the narrative, that appeals to me in a way acting never did. I've also learned to be alone. Not lonely, but actually alone, comfortable in my own company, at peace with my own mind. That's something I never learned before. I was always trying to prove something to someone. I think about my father every day. Some days I'm angry at him, some days I feel grateful. Most days, I feel both at the same time. I keep his journals on a shelf in my office. I reread them occasionally, looking for new insights, new understanding. The man who wrote those journals was not the man I grew up with. He was softer, more introspective, wrestling with questions I never knew he cared about. I think about the parallel lives we might have lived if he'd been able to reach out, if I'd been brave enough to reach back. I think about the conversations we could have had, the understanding we might have reached. But I also recognize that we were both products of our time, our culture, our familial patterns. We did the best we could with what we had. My brother Francesco called me a few months ago. "I'm leaving the company," he said. I didn't say anything, I just listened. I'm 60 years old, and I've spent my entire life doing what Dad wanted me to do. Even after I realized he didn't expect it of me, I kept doing it. Out of habit, I guess, out of fear. But I'm tired. I'm exhausted by trying to be the son he wanted me to be. What will you do instead? I don't know yet. That's the terrifying part. I have no idea who I am when I'm not building things for my father's company. Maybe that's okay, I said. Maybe you can take some time to find out. I'm too old to start over. Dad said the same thing, I replied. He was too old to change, too proud to apologize, too trapped in his own patterns, but he changed anyway, and it brought him peace in the end. Did it? Francesco asked. Did it really? Or did he just die convinced he was right about everything, and we're interpreting his journals as apologies because we need them to be apologies? It was a fair question, and I didn't have a good answer. I think he experienced some peace, I finally said. I think he reached a point where he could see his life clearly without all the defensiveness and pride, and that clarity, even if it came too late, was healing for him and for me. I hope you're right, Francesco said. I hope it's not too late for me too. Part 16. The Inheritance, REVISITD. There's something I haven't told anyone except my therapist, and I'm telling it now on the internet to strangers because I think it matters. A year after my father's funeral, I was going through the house, packing up his personal belongings to donate to charity. In his bedroom closet, behind rows of carefully organized suits, I found a safe. It wasn't mentioned in the will. It wasn't referenced anywhere. The combination was my birth date, 12/11/1954. Yes, I know there was confusion earlier about when I was born. That's what happens when you grow up with a father who rewrites history to make himself look better. The real date is November 11, 1954. The date he chose for the safe's combination is the date I was actually born, not the date in his preferred narrative. Inside the safe was a stack of letters, hundreds of them, all addressed to me, all unsent. They started in 1982, the year I was thrown out of the house. The first one was written in his shaky handwriting, rage visible in every heavy pen stroke. Leonardo asterisk. I have decided I will not write to you because you do not deserve my words. You have made yourself into a liar and a disappointment. I have decided that you are no longer my son. I mean this. I am writing it now so that I will not weaken. Do not come back. Do not call. Do not expect anything from me. But then there was another letter, dated a week later. I lied. I cannot do it. I cannot disown you. I cannot hate you no matter how hard I try. This is a weakness, and it shames me. And then there were letters from 1983, from 1984, from 1985, where he tried, over and over, to write to me. Some were apologetic. Some were angry. Some were just observations about his day, as if he were writing in a diary but addressing me. Dear Leonardo asterisk. Today I saw a young man who looked like you on the street. He was carrying a backpack and wearing clothes that were too young for him. I wanted to stop him and tell him that it doesn't matter what he wears, the world will judge him anyway. The world is cruel to men who don't fit the mold. But I couldn't do it. I just watched him walk away. Your mother told me you are acting in something, a commercial. She wouldn't tell me the details. She said you wouldn't want me to know. I don't blame her. I have made myself someone you don't want to know. There were letters from 1986, after the heart attack. Dear Leonardo asterisk. I almost died today. Or rather, I almost did yesterday, and today I am still alive, and I don't know how to feel about that. All I could think about was you. All I could think about was that I might die without ever seeing your face again, and that seems like an unbearable tragedy. I wanted to call you from the hospital. I wanted to say, your father had a heart attack, and he might have died, and he has things he needs to tell you. But I was ashamed. I was ashamed that I had wasted years on anger instead of on love. I don't know if you would have come if I'd called, but I should have tried. I should have risked that rejection. And then, near the end, letters from the last 10 years of his life. Dear Leonardo asterisk. I am 83 years old now. I don't have much time left, though I don't want to be maudlin about that. This is simply a fact. Time is running out. Your mother is still alive, thank God. She is still kind to me even though I have not deserved her kindness. She tells me about your life. She tells me about the films you make. I watch them in secret, and I cry. I want to die knowing that you know I am proud of you. I am so terribly, desperately proud of you. I always was. I was just too broken to show it. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect anything. I just want you to know that I failed you, and that failure is the deepest regret of my life." The last letter was dated just 3 months before his death. "Dear Leonardo asterisk, I am writing this to tell you that I have left you the house. I have also left you these letters. I wanted you to know that I tried to reach out to you 1,000 times. I tried and failed 1,000 times. My fear was stronger than my love, which is perhaps the greatest indictment of who I was as a father. But I want you to know something. Somewhere in those 1,000 failures to reach out, my love for you remained constant. It did not diminish. It did not transform into anger or resentment. It was simply there, present, unchanging, like the force of gravity. That love was not enough. I understand that now. Love without action, love without risk, is just sentiment. It doesn't rebuild relationships. It doesn't heal wounds. But it was real. In the space beyond this life, if such a space exists, I hope to find you there. I hope to tell you all the things I couldn't say in life. I hope you'll forgive me. Your father asterisk. Roberto DiCaprio asterisk. Part 17, The Peace asterisk. I didn't show those letters to anyone immediately. I kept them to myself, reading them over and over, getting to know the man who wrote them in a way I never knew him in life. What struck me most was the clarity in his pain. He wasn't a man denying what he'd done or justifying his actions. He was a man aware of his failures, wrestling with them, trying to understand how he'd become the kind of man who could hurt his own son. I realized that all the years I'd spent angry at him, he'd been angry at himself. All the years I'd been building a career to prove something to him, he'd been watching from the shadows, trying to find the courage to reach out. It made the estrangement more tragic somehow. It wasn't that he didn't care, it was that he cared too much, and it paralyzed him. I think a lot of people can relate to that. I think a lot of people carry that paralysis. The desire to reach out to someone you've hurt, combined with the terror that they won't forgive you, creates a kind of stasis. You end up doing nothing, which is often more damaging than doing the wrong thing. My therapist asked me once, if you could have one conversation with your father now, what would you say? I thought about this for a long time. I think I'd tell him that I understand now. I understand why he was the way he was. I understand that his cruelty came from his own fear. And I would tell him that the estrangement, as painful as it was, taught me things I needed to learn. It taught me that I couldn't build my entire identity on someone else's approval. It taught me that I had to become myself, regardless of who was watching. Do you forgive him? Yes, I said, I do, and I hope he forgives me too. For what? For being so angry with him. For refusing to reach back when he was trying so hard to reach toward me, even if he could never quite make the gesture. For not understanding his pain until it was too late. Part 18, The Legacy Redefined asterisk. My father wanted to leave a legacy of buildings, concrete and steel, visible to the world, bearing his name and his vision. In the end, the legacy he left was something much more fragile and much more lasting, a record of his failure and his attempt to understand it. Those letters, those journals, they matter more than any building ever could. I've thought about publishing them. I've thought about sharing my father's words with the world, creating something that might help other people understand their own estrangement, their own pain. But I think maybe that's something to do in the future. For now, I'm keeping them private, reading them, learning from them, letting them teach me about love and failure and the second chances that come too late. My career has evolved. I'm not as interested in playing broken men anymore. I'm more interested in playing men who are trying to heal, men who are learning to be present with their families, men who are discovering that there are different ways to live, different definitions of success. I've become an advocate for family reconciliation. I work with organizations that help estranged family members reconnect. I give talks about my father, about his estrangement from me, about the work it takes to rebuild a relationship, even if that relationship has to be rebuilt with a dead man's words instead of live conversation. I've also become closer with my brother. He did eventually leave the company. He took early retirement and spent a year traveling, figuring out who he was when he wasn't building things for our father's legacy. He's slower than I am, more cautious, but he's building something, a foundation that helps immigrant families start businesses. It seems fitting somehow. Joya was the one who kept the family together through all of this. She visited Dad, maintained the relationship, brought his words and his pain back to me. She's the real hero of this story, though she'd never say so. She'd say she was just doing what family does. Part 19, The Last Word. I think about that funeral, that day when Frank Santoro pulled me aside and handed me the envelope. I think about how my father orchestrated that moment, how he timed his death and his revelation to force a conversation I'd been avoiding for 40 years. In some ways, it was cruel. He got the final word. He got to apologize without hearing my response. He got to set the terms of the reconciliation and then disappear, leaving me to work out the forgiveness alone. But maybe that was the only way it could have happened. Maybe I would have rejected his apology if he'd made it in person. Maybe my pride would have kept me from accepting his vulnerability. Maybe his perfect orchestration was actually the only gift he could give me, the gift of clarity. Without the complications of a live conversation where old wounds might have reopened. Or maybe he was just a man who did his best, and his best was limited by his own pain. I don't need to know the answer. I've made peace with the uncertainty. Part 20, The Present. I'm sitting in my current home, not the house in Hollywood Hills, which I gave away, but a small cottage in Malibu overlooking the ocean. It's quiet here. The noise of my career feels far away, even though I'm still acting, still building something that people will watch and remember. I'm 73 years old. I'm healthy as far as I know. I might have 20 years left, or 30, or just one. I've learned not to take for granted the time I have. I don't think about my father constantly anymore. Some days I don't think about him at all. But sometimes, watching the ocean, I feel him there, not as a ghost, but as a presence, a weight in my chest, a reminder of everything we didn't say to each other. I wonder what he'd think of the man I've become. I wonder if he'd approve of my choices, or if he'd still find them somehow lacking. Part of me doesn't care. I've learned to approve of myself, which was perhaps his greatest gift, even if it came through rejection. But another part of me, the part that will always be the boy he threw out of the house, still wants his approval, still wants to walk into a room and see pride in his eyes. That boy is still there. I've learned to live with him, to honor his need without being controlled by it. And I think that's what my father was trying to teach me in the end, not through words or demonstrations, but through his absence. I think he was trying to teach me that I had to become my own source of approval. I just wish he'd been able to teach me that while he was alive. Epilogue. My therapist asked me recently, if you could send a message to your father, what would it be? I thought about this for a long time. I thought about all the things I wanted to say. Thank you for the house. Forgive me for being angry. I understand now. I love you. I'm sorry. But in the end, I said something simpler. I would tell him that I'm happy, that despite everything, despite the estrangement and the pain and the lost years, I'm happy, and I think that would have made him happy too. I think my father spent his entire life chasing things that never quite satisfied him. Money, power, control, respect, legacy. He thought these things would make him happy, and maybe they did in brief moments, but they weren't enough. What would have made him happy, I think, was knowing that his son, the son he was so afraid would be a disappointment, became someone who could find joy not in achievement, but in being alive. Someone who could appreciate a sunset without needing to build something on the land it illuminated. Someone who could love without needing to control the terms of that love. Someone who could finally, after 70 years, forgive. That's the legacy I'm building now. Not a legacy of buildings or businesses or things that will outlast me, but a legacy of healing, of understanding, of showing people that estrangement doesn't have to be permanent, that forgiveness is possible even when it comes too late, that love, broken, imperfect, flawed as it is, can still redeem us. My father didn't get to see that, but I think he knew it was possible. I think that's what he was trying to tell me through all those unsent letters, all those journals, all those hidden second wills. He was telling me, I failed you, but it's not too late for you to succeed. It's not too late for you to build something that matters. It's not too late for you to become the man I couldn't be. And it's not too late for you to forgive me. So I do. I forgive him. And in forgiving him, I finally forgive myself.